will be using the hashtag UCL, which is my name. I'm Candy. I'm from the UCL Women's Network, which is a campus-wide network that campaigns for gender equality. And then to remind you, UCL operates a safe space policy, which means that no student should ever be made to feel uncomfortable because of his or her personal views. And I would ask you to respect that policy today when making any points. If you would like to make any, if you want to ask any questions, please direct them to me as the chair when we open the floor to discussion. We won't tolerate any personal attacks, obviously, so safe space, please. The format of the debate tonight will be Tom will make a 10-minute speech, followed by a speech from Estelle. Both of these speeches are protected, so you can't make any points of information during those, but we will then move to the floor for discussion and questions relating to the speeches. And we will try and keep that going for as long as we can, but we have to be out of this room by 9 o'clock. So 10 minutes before we have to leave, we'll have a 5-minute summation speech from Tom and then from Estelle. I'll introduce your speakers now, shall I? Speaking in proposition, Tom Martin is famously suing LSE's Gender Institute, citing a breach of contract, misleading advertising, misrepresentation, and breach of the Gender Equality Duty Act. He is accused the Institute of systematic anti-male discrimination and is due in court on March 13, where he will be representing himself. Tom's Legal Fighting Fund has received 129 donations from 10 countries, totaling £4,300 so far. He claims that whilst sexism against women is often recognised, misandry goes unnoticed, despite the fact that women verbalise 4 times more misandry than men do misogyny. Tom blogs on his website, sexismbusters.org, and tweets at @sexismbusters. So that's Tom.
Could I use your microphone a bit? It's not picking up at all.
I think this microphone's for the cameras.
Yeah.
Right. Did you sound in? Sorry.
Can everybody hear me when I'm speaking?
A bit loud, yeah.
It's vague.
A bit louder.
Yeah, but,
Speaking opposition is Estelle Hart. Estelle has been the NUS National Women's Officer for the past year and is currently running for re-election. She was also NUS Wales Women's Officer for 2 years and is a passionate defender of the position of the Women's Officer within student unions. She says she has been a feminist for as long as she can remember, and she is involved in many areas of feminist campaigning. For example, she has come out in opposition to government cuts to women's services and has also spoken out against Nadine Dorries' attempt to promote abstinence-focused sex education for young women. Under her leadership, the NUS Women's Campaign has fought for better representation of women within student unions and an end to objectification and violence. Estelle Hart. Okay, so if everyone's ready, we'll start with speeches. Tom,
okay, how's the sound with the cameras? Okay. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, well, first of all, I thought I was going to get 20 minutes, but I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to rush through it a bit. Thanks, everybody. This is all a bit of a rush. Is feminism sexist? Well, the average person identifying as a feminist probably isn't a sexist. They believe in equality and have been told that women have less than men, so focus on women's issues. It makes sense. But the average professional feminist, on the other hand, may be sexist. They once believed in equality, got involved in the women's issues of the day, then found out women aren't a particularly oppressed group on the whole, but as the money is coming in for women's issues, they forget about the equality bit and become addicted to perpetuating false victim female stories which blame men and spread fear, contempt, and hostility towards men. Professional feminists these days need to be professional liars, unfortunately. Or at least that's what they think. The linchpin victim feminist lie of lies is the pay gap. Feminists will tell you women are paid 15, 20, 30, 40% less than men for the same work per hour. So men are officially bastards. And they owe women money, big time, on some level, some spiritual level. The truth, though, is that in the UK, women under 30 earn 1.5% more per hour than men under 30. In the USA, for every hour spent on work-related activity, including commuting or report writing or being clocked in at work itself, women earn 4% more than men per hour. When Harriet Harman, the ex-women's minister, tells you part-time female workers earn 40% less than men per hour, she is comparing part-time women's to full-time men's hourly rate. The truth is, women working part-time earn 4% more per hour than men working part-time. We're all being lied to, I don't know if everyone here realizes this, by sexist professional victim feminists, and they're usually spending our money to tell those lies. Women who work earn more per hour of effort than men. We should all be happy about that, or at least about the equality bit of it. Professional victim feminists are not happy as they want to continue pretending women are the victims and men the perpetrators or benefactors to justify further funding for the victim feminist advocacy jobs. The next big lie is the glass ceiling. Professional feminists will tell you that women are being kept out of the top jobs due to an invisible layer of discrimination by the people in top jobs, mainly men. The truth is, women discriminate against the top jobs. LSE's Dr. Catherine Hakim, an expert on women in work, will tell you the awful truth. Women currently express half the paid work ethic of men. But rather than trying to encourage women to enter those high-flying professions, professional victim feminists find it more convenient to blame men for the glass ceiling, thus giving women excuses for lowering their sights, giving up, and perpetuating the inequality. When a stubborn victim feminist finds out that there are no pay gaps for equal work, and that glass ceilings are illusory, then they'll change the subject. Violence against women. Professional victim feminists would like you to believe women are 95% of domestic violence victims. Money pours in from governments and charities to save battered women. The Scottish Government spends £100 million a year on provision for female victims of domestic violence and £28,000 on provision for male victims of domestic violence. But what professional feminists have managed to keep relatively secret for 30 years is all the research that finds women are slightly more domestically violent than men in relationships. Women initiate 70% of domestic violence. Women are more likely to use weapons, premeditation, the element of surprise, poison, or an accomplice, and are therefore more likely to get away with it than men. But professional victim feminists want you to keep sending your money to battered women's shelters that refuse to let men who are victims of domestic violence share the facilities. And governments say, okay, and they fund it. Imagine you were assaulted by a black person, then you went to hospital and the all-white staff insisted that you be kept apart from black staff or patients whilst you recover. After all, it was a black person who assaulted you. It would be racist, separatist fear-mongering, and it would make you even more sick, I hope. Professional victim feminists, though, are allowed to sex segregate, instilling the idea that all men are a threat to women, so must be kept out, and this is sexist in the extreme. The women-only domestic violence industry is the main cash cow for professional male-blaming victim feminists, and my opponent here supports the sex segregation. In my opinion, domestic violence shelters should be forced to admit men or closed down. All those people who want to continue sex segregating can move to Yemen for a happier life. Professional feminists' next favorite sex trick is inflating rape statistics. Professional victim feminists are the queens of false allegation. Professional victim feminists will cook the statistics in any way possible to make men look more rapey than we actually are. Firstly, professional victim feminist government ministers will claim that only 2 or 3% of rape claims are false, when research and experience shows more like 50 to 90% of rape claims are false. The government, the police, the elite feminists know this, but they're keeping it secret. Men are being portrayed somewhere between 17 and 45 times more rapey than we actually are. The Professional male-blaming victim feminists will claim only 6.5% of rape cases end in a guilty verdict. What they're not telling you is that 58% of rape trials end in a guilty verdict. Since 1985, the number of rape allegations per year has increased ninefold. We are in a false rape epidemic, and the rape lies culture is top-down. Professional victim feminist government ministers exaggerate rape statistics freely, and the general population follows suit with a barrage of false allegations of its own against men. Also, professional victim feminist media will invent stories about drinks spiking, date rape drugs, and so forth, when the truth is, of the women showing up at accident and emergency complaining their drinks have been spiked, the blood tests find no illegal drugs in the system, just Bacardi Breezer. Rohypnol, the date rape drug. In the UK, there are no confirmed cases of Rohypnol being used in a rape, but the overwhelming lack of drink spiking has not stopped the professional victim feminist scaremongering about men in social situations. Another way professional feminists will generate rape hysteria is by pretending that women are sex trafficked into prostitution from overseas, tricked or forced into sex slavery. The last government claimed there were 80,000 trafficked women, but it turned out there were 80,000 foreign prostitutes in the country, and the government decided to pretend they'd all been forced into it. The government released posters saying men who went with foreign prostitutes would be rapists, as the women had been forced into it. What the government did not tell you is that a 2009 nationwide police operation raiding 800 or more premises couldn't find anyone who'd been forced into it. It turns out they hadn't been press ganged, but were volunteering to be sex slaves. But the professional victim feminists would rather present the poor old punter or job as some abominable rapist, rather than just an icky loser having sex with an even ickier loser. When the government tells you that if you get in an unlicensed cab, you're going to get raped, you've seen the posters around London. Which one of these brown men is the rapist? Saying there are 9 sexual assaults a month in London, but not telling you there are only 9 allegations a month, and including all types of taxi. Public transport, fear men, is the message. Inflating rape statistics and stories is counterproductive if you're a real feminist, because rape is women's #1 fear, prohibits their freedom of movement, and hence their economic activity. So if you want to help gender developmental progress, don't inflate rape statistics. Any real feminists in here tonight who feel the same way? The National Union of Students Women's Office, represented by Estelle here, appears to have presided over some research which inflates rape and violence statistics itself. They came up with a headline-grabbing story that only 1 in 7 female students had experienced serious physical or sexual assault while students, but they used a deliberately unreliable method of research, a SOP, a self-selecting opinion poll. They told female students they were conducting a survey on their experience of violence, harassment, and sexual assault, and would the students like to take part, so those students hadn't suffered any of those crimes would be less likely to participate. It's the oldest trick in the book. It was highlighted here in 1994 in a book called Who Stole Feminism? Who Did Steal Feminism?
Thank you very much, Tom. You can see quite a few stellar faces. So we'll move to Estelle, who will present the other side of the argument. You have 10 minutes when you're ready.
Do I think women are oppressed by society? Yes, I do. Do I blame men for this? No, I don't. I, like the majority of feminists, blame the patriarchy. Now, it's quite interesting, actually, because Tom, what you've done is you've essentially given us a lecture on what you believe feminism is. And I think it actually runs contrary to what I've ever been told feminism is, what I believe feminism to be, and I'm one of those professional feminists you seem to have taken such a strong dislike to. And fortunately, there aren't as many of us as you like to make out, if only there were more. And when I say I blame the patriarchy and I don't mean men, I mean that I blame a society that is held back by by structures stemming from a time when actually we didn't have this kind of quality of debate, stemming from a time when your position in society was dictated by your money, dictated by your class, and of course it still is. And I really worry actually that those are some of the things you've ignored. You made a few references there to if black people were treated in the way men are. Actually, we live in a society where there are many black people who live in this country because their families came here when some of our ancestors bought and sold them. And to actually compare historically and ignore that historical problem and compare men who have traditionally always been powerful positions in our society really ignores a whole load of things. And do I think men face problems? Of course I do. I'd be naive not to. But to just simply talk about that in terms of gender when all the evidence suggests otherwise, and not talk about race, not talk about sexuality, not talk about class, I think not only is quite false, but it really does a disservice to a lot of people. I'm not going to justify the statistical analysis behind the pay gap. I'm sure all the statisticians who work in government offices and work on newspapers and repeat that and say that's a valid statistic, they do that for me. When we talk about violence against women, now violence against women is something that's very important to me. I'm a radical feminist, one of the ones I'm sure Tom will be telling his children to look out for. But I believe that actually violence against women is a really fighting violence against women is a cornerstone of feminism. But let's talk about some of the things that you said. Let's talk about the fact that you say, oh well, the numbers lead well, more men experience violence, etc., etc. Now, I think we'll take more time we've got here this evening to unpick some of the things you've said. Let's actually talk about the type of violence women experience. Every statistic, every report, and these are not the reports, these are reports funded by a variety of organisations, say that the type of violence women experience is very different. It's long-term systematic violence. It's violence that only gets reported to the police after more than 30 incidents. It's violence from a loved one that starts with psychological abuse and leads to physical abuse. And we know that actually 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner in the UK. That's the type of violence we're talking about. We're not talking about 2 people in the heat of the moment coming aggressive with each other. We're talking about violence as a base. Let's talk about why women are violent. Let's talk about why some of the stats exist around women's use of weapons, women's apparently completely out of context starting of violence. That's a reaction. That is a long-term reaction to violence. If you look at how people behave when they have been in traumatic situations, yes, sometimes there's not even a trigger, sometimes there is, but we don't understand it. We don't understand that movement towards the kitchen door has meant for the past 4 years a punch in the face. We don't understand that getting particularly angry about the football result actually means you're going to be lying face down in a pool of your own blood that night. We don't understand what the triggers are, but they exist. So that violence isn't unprovoked. It isn't premeditated. That violence stems from systematic abuse. The idea of money for violence against women's services, if only I wouldn't be wearing a shirt from Asda if there was a lot of money sloshing around in the feminist movement. The government have systematically cut and also removed ring fencing from that, and I think that's worthy of a separate debate, and hopefully after this one, yourself, MSOT, might have me back so we can talk about that. When it comes to rape, I'm sorry, there have been a variety of massive government reviews, and even the Conservative Party, a party I don't think we're going to be, maybe in yours, but tarring the feminist brush anytime soon, have acknowledged that the statistics in the Stern Review are very viable, and they actually suggest that levels of false reporting are the same as many other crimes, and that runs at about 4 to 5%. And you talk about each rape as being almost a separate accusation against each man, but actually, a rape accusation isn't saying, oh look, another man's done this. The majority of rapists or repeat offenders done offending up to 14 times and often never caught. Drink spiking, it's quite interesting because you know what, you're agreeing with the feminists on some of the things you said. I find adverts warning women not to get into unlicensed taxi cabs in case something happens to them absolutely abhorrent, because I actually know that the fault of rape lies with the rapist, not with the woman. I deal with trafficking. I think the very fact you said these people volunteer to be sex slaves, there's something very, very wrong with that sentence. You don't volunteer to be a slave, but please in the name. You keep talking about victim feminists, and there's a real irony in that, because I don't think I'm a victim. I think there's problems with society, and I think I should do something about that. And I don't think women who march or reclaim the night marches think they're victims. I don't think women who get up and face their abusers in court are victims. I don't think the hotel chambermaid who came out and said what Dominique Strauss-Kahn did to her and what she and her colleagues have to do, no, what he did.
Excuse me. Speeches are protected.
I don't think she's a victim. I don't think she thinks she's a victim. And I don't think the women who day in, day out fight for better rights for them, fight for better rights for their sisters, both here, the world, I don't think they're victims. The only person playing the victim card tonight, Tom, is you. The only person saying that, somehow, oh, the world's conspiring against me, all the women, oh, everything in my life. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I think there's a problem.
I'm okay, thanks.
But it's good. Down. But the only sense of victimhood here is I'm getting from the side of the debate that is so seemingly obsessed with the fact women are out to get them. I don't think men are out to get me. I think society's broken and we need to fix it. So actually, let's talk about victimhood. Let's talk about the victim mentality. Absolutely everything you've said, and let's actually, I'm not sure we've got time to unpick some of the many issues of what you said, but I hope that gives a bit of an overview. And actually, just to say, feminists aren't victims. We're anything but. We're the opposite. And is feminism sexist? I'm going to have to say no.
It's like a pantomime.
Thank you very much, Steph. Okay, we're going to move on to the floor now. If anybody wants to make a point, I'm going to cap you at 2 minutes. And if you'd like to ask a question...
That's quite long, 2 minutes.
You've got an
Cap
hour.
them at 2 minutes, or me?
Then.
Okay, go
Is everybody okay with me capping?
Point of order, are these only questions or can we make points, or is it both? Or
You can
just
make
questions?
points, questions, and if you'd like to direct them at particular people, you have to direct them via me, so that we're avoiding personal attacks. So I'll take you as you have your hand first.
Thank you very much for hosting this debate. It's one I've waited for about 30 years. We really needed to have it. The question there is feminism sexist? And to be honest, I don't think either party really touched upon it. So what I'd like to ask anybody in this room, particularly any ladies here, any women, whatever you want to call yourself these days, is you get me a feminist text. You get me a feminist text that does not slag men off. And that's my challenge to you. And I will leave my email and my physical address. You find me any feminist article or text that doesn't slag men off.
True.
Okay, my second point very quickly is that I find it actually quite offensive when anybody has a go at any particular group, okay, whether they're gay, Hispanic, children, women, foreign, all of that kind of stuff. And I just find it extraordinary that it's okay to have a go at men as a group the way you do. You can have a go at the top 1% of men who are very rich. You can have a go at the 5% of men who are violent. But you shouldn't be having a go at men as a group. You should be ashamed of yourselves for doing that.
Very true.
I'd like to direct a question. I would wonder what the feeling is on feminist texts that don't necessarily mention women at all, but address the fact that women, for example, aren't represented very well in politics, and maybe the descriptive versus substantive representation of that. There's no mention at all of many such texts that I've read recently in my studies. So if you would like me to send that to the required person, I would be more than happy to.
I'd be happy to read that, thank you.
And also, I'd like to ask what the opinion on the fact that there is the information you can get from it, that there is sex trafficking happening in North Korea, whereby women as a way of fleeing the country, move to China and then are subsequently sold into marriage, which they may not want to be involved in, but that's they're either shipped there by other people, being told that this is a way to get out of North Korea, and then they're put into a marriage of which they didn't want to be in. I'd like to know what the view on that is, if they're slaves or volunteers.
Did anybody want to come back on that?
Yes, I would. Obviously, I think we're talking about feminism in Britain here, so that's quite irrelevant. But what Tom meant when he said...
It doesn't give a particular...
Well, I think we're talking about Britain, not worldwide. I mean, it's just so wide worldwide. So let's just talk about Britain, shall we, at the moment. And when Tom said they volunteered to be slaves, maybe that was a wrong choice of word. But 99% of women in prostitution actually choose to be prostitutes. They choose for one reason or another. Maybe they're drug addicts, or how about the brothels that are run by madams? How about the high-class prostitutes? You cannot say prostitution is caused by men. Prostitution is a two-way traffic. Men's natural genetic drive, women's need for extra cash rather than working in Tesco. So it is a volunteer choice, and what Estelle did not do, and what perhaps Tom didn't do, but he did use the word volunteer, is say that women actually choose a lot of these discriminations that feminists have actually converted into inequalities, oppressions and discriminations. Now, only a feminist could turn a freely made choice into a discrimination. Nobody else could do that except a feminist or a male feminist. Okay, so prostitution is one of those things. Pay gap. Women choose jobs that are not dangerous, so they get paid less. They choose to work part-time, so they get paid less. They choose to work not in top jobs. Actually, women choose. Read the book, Why Britain Hates Men, Exposing Feminism, and you will see this is itemised, evidenced, researched, why women choose what they are. And only a feminist could actually convert a freely made choice into a discrimination and an oppression.
Behind you.
Hi, the gentleman in front of me, if you're looking for feminist text which is not slag mail, I'd recommend Catelyn Moran's How to Be a Woman.
Yeah, I've read that.
No, not at all. Sorry.
It's good, I've read it, it's a great book. But I don't think it's feminist text.
Well, on a more serious note, sir, I won't deny that some women, for whatever reason, choose prostitution. In fact, there are also male prostitutes. The reasons are their own. We don't judge. What I am disgusted by here is the trivialising of rape. There are...
By who? By who?
I felt you did.
I was talking about false rape allegations which have nothing to do with rape.
By the amount of false rape statistics.
Nothing to do with rape.
Yes, actually. 3 in 10 rapes are dismissed by the police, just not even investigated, just thrown out. That's 3 times as high as any other sort of previous bodily harm. 10% rape, 30%.
But why did they dismiss them?
Sandy, you can't have
Can you stop interrupting people while they're making their point? If you want to raise a point afterwards, you're perfectly welcome to, and raise your hand. I'm going to try and pick different people each time, but can you please allow her to finish? She's still got quite a good minute and a half to go, and she's been interrupted 3 or 4 times.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to say that rape is already trivialised in our society. It's trivialised enough. And whatever else you would like to say, do not trivialise it. It happens to men and it happens to women. Do not trivialise it. It is a serious crime. Whoever it's committed by, whoever it's committed to. Thank you.
Okay, if anyone was listening, I said false rape is an epidemic. That has nothing to do with rape. People are understandably sensitive about rape, and so am I. False rape has got nothing to do with it, and I'd like to hear a few more feminists making that point clear. Oh my God. Okay, sure. regarding sex slavery or sex trafficking or whatever other name you want to give the story, it is a very old story. It's the white slavery myth. It goes back to the white slavery myth, and it's regurgitated again and again. You may not have realised, you may not have read, but Nick Davis of The Guardian did 2 Freedom of Information requests on the UK government and found out that the police had been told by the politicians to generate some statistics because they had found no sex slaves. There is no reason to believe this story is any different anywhere in the world. There are individual cases where individual sick criminals will lock people in basements, etc., as in the Fritzl case in Austria, but there is no organised sex slavery in the UK. This is hard to believe because you've seen it on Channel 4. They did a documentary on Operation Pentameter 2, and we saw a sex slave talking in silhouette, and she was going, "Oh, they treat me like pigs, oh, rah, rah, rah." Yeah? Well, they dug her up from a previous police operation and then faked it to make it look like they found her on Operation Pentameter 2. Dennis McShane, MP, is the chief liar for the Labour government about this issue, and Harriet Harman will do the same thing. There is no reason to lie about sex slavery.
I initially didn't want to remove ours. I initially wasn't actually going to mention that, but yeah, there's evidence that suggests like numbers of women who've been trafficked is actually inflated, and like feminists will say that because actually my feminism certainly is one that says we shouldn't be afraid of discussing the reasons why women enter prostitution, and we shouldn't be afraid of us not criticising their choices, acknowledging that it's very hard to make a real choice in society. Like, it's very hard to make a choice in society where you're underpaid, overworked, and continually sexualised. The idea that, you know, clearly many people in this room believe that an attack on the patriarchy is an attack on men. I don't really agree with capitalism as an ideology. It doesn't mean I hate everybody who makes money in a capitalist system. It's an absolute nonsense to equate the two. And talk about offensive to men and hating men. I don't believe that men are all sort of base creatures driven by sexual desires, which seems to be what's being suggested by some people in the audience. I don't believe that men are one homogenous group. I don't believe that men all agree on the same things and all feel the same things and are sort of just these purely carnal creatures, which does seem to have actually been suggested by some in the audience, saying that feminism is about hating men. Actually, some of the attitudes I see presented as attacks on feminism are often attacks not just on women, but attacks on men as well, and attacks on what it is to be male. Because it's in a very narrow world where gender is really readily defined. I think gender is a social construct. Until we dismantle it, we've still got to keep talking about it. But the idea that somehow something, you know, a small biological difference makes you completely and utterly different to everyone else is an absolute nonsense. And in establishing that, that's what feminism is about. It's not about sex, it's about gender, about how gender myths actually pull us all down.
At the back, has hand up first, and then I'll take you over here. If you'd like to go ahead.
Okay, I'd just like to, I'm not somebody who's made a study of feminism or gender studies, but I have been around a bit. And I'd just like to raise the level a bit of the debate, because it seems to me two things, first of all. First of all, I think actually Tom and Estelle have far more in common than we would readily admit, because they are both egalitarians. And Tom has actually prefaced his speech by saying that it was a typical feminist is actually, well, the feminist would actually not be a man-hater. There's more a sort of generalised climate in society. And it brings me to the point which Tom repeatedly made, which is that, is it possible, can we discuss the possibility that 40 years of feminism has produced a kind of self-perpetuating, institutionalised,
yes,
man-hating culture which only exists because people have made careers out of it?
Yes.
And I'd also like to point out the fact that there are people who make money out of fear and loathing. And one of the demonisation of men is something which has driven the circulation of newspapers. And there is a sort of denigration of the debate of feminism. I think the sisters of the 60s, if they could hear the level of debate that goes on now, they would weep, because what needs to happen is the debate to be raised dramatically, and for the handy demonisation of men, both in the media, where it makes money, and where in social policy creation, where frequently you can see careers and whole organisations and funding structures driven by, yes, some of it is genuinely necessary change, but some of it we can see are myths, because revolutions create in structures which themselves are very hard to dismantle. And there are sort of generations of people who simply see a career in perpetuating a certain myth. So I would like just to sort of suggest that we could just think about structures and the long-term plan for raising the debate and for improving communication on these issues.
I'd like to pick up on the...
Sorry, behind you.
Yeah.
No, sorry, behind you. Okay.
Alright, well there's just a few things. Sorry, can I just make a point that we don't want to be filmed? And
Yeah.
they're having 2 cameras over there that have been filming in this direction. And I just want to clarify that if we need to move or they need to move forward, we're more than happy to.
I will make sure you never
Okay, great.
hear any of this.
If anyone at
that
home
hasn't
tell
been
you who
done.
doesn't want to be on, who can play you out, just
Yeah.
tell us and we'll do it.
If you approach the film crew at the end and remind them that you
Sure,
don't
sure.
want to be.
Fine, yeah.
Okay, just a few things I'm thinking about through the discussion. Firstly, I think we need to question when you say women aren't sex slaves. I think we need to question what kind of a choice prostitution is and what kind of a background these women have come from if they feel like they have to go into prostitution or even they want to. And I'd actually question the motivations for that choice, and I think that's something else that you need to look into rather than them just simply being forced no choice being sold. It could be many other things about their lifestyles, about their background that I think that we probably need to change, because I don't think for many women prostitution is a viable option to begin with. About the rape thing too, I say that at the moment, rape it's so difficult for a woman to stand up in court, and the person who has raped her or allegedly raped her is so infrequently found to be guilty that I'd say that I think it's probably very counterproductive for these rape victims to be told actually there aren't that many rapes at the moment, and most of them are false, and there's a reason why police don't actually consider them. I think that's very counterproductive, considering what a serious crime that is, and just how difficult it is for a woman to stand up against the man who's done that. And I honestly just don't think that that's an acceptable thing to be trying to say at the moment. Another thing, yeah, I agree actually, there are many things that I think that a woman nowadays, if she, I think that obviously there are some restraints. It's difficult when the business place that you want to go into is male dominated. Sometimes you might not feel like that's a world open to you. I think that it is a world open to women. And I think that women can do what they like. And I think that if you have a determination, you can do what you want to do as well. People are so aware of not being sexist that I think that you can make your way. I think that gentleman over there is wrong. This debate is not about Britain. This can be about the rest of the world. And I think that at the moment, Western women. Oh, sorry.
It's fine. You can finish your sentence.
Okay, Western women face sexism. Just because they're objectified. But in the rest of the world, there are so many more serious cases that we really need to consider and focus on. Thank you.
I'd like to very much broaden this out, looking at the biological underpinning and how this translates. My name is Steve Oxon, I research cross-discipline about biological roots of human sociality. Across biology, the distinction between male and female is the big problem in any biological system is how to get rid of building up of gene replication errors. And that the mechanism to solve that has been quarantined on the male half of the lineage, which is why I get dominant why I get males competing against each other, and why this feeds through to an overriding prejudice which is apparent in every culture, in every history, against the majority of necessarily lower status males. It's not against females. The main prejudice to police the male hierarchy, to stop most males getting access to sex in biology to know about. Now, this has been amplified very recently by the evidence of PC, which is a big backlash by the left, so to salve their cognitive dissonance about the failure of their overall progressive project. And it's to blame, instead of blaming the social theory, they blame the workers who didn't rise up. And the worker is typically male and is white, and therefore PC identified subgroups, supposedly plausibly disadvantaged, are females, non-males, females, non-white ethnic minorities, in terms of sexuality, etc. This is what explains third wave feminism. It's not about being nice to people, so maybe say it's about fucking the majority.
I'd like to kind of raise the issue that it gets to a point where the argument somehow becomes futile, because I think at the core of this debate, feminists versus kind of those who don't believe in its cause, or even why women feel that they need to be feminists, is because I recently went to a talk by Kimmel at LSE. He's kind of a feminist sympathizer, academic, and he gave a really interesting anecdote, which was he once heard at a feminist group a woman and a black woman talking, and the white woman said to the black woman, "I feel like we all have a kind of collective movement as women, sisters, or in a sisterhood." And the black woman said, "Well, I don't agree. I don't agree with that, because when you look in the mirror, you see a woman. When I look in the mirror, I see a black woman." And that's very different, because privilege is invisible to those who have it. And it's very similar in this situation. The privilege is invisible to those men who have it.
As I said.
And I wonder if you can define privilege in the kind of selected statistics. Which I think this is just becoming a battle of statistics which are inflated, not in just what you're saying, but in those that you cite. I think you can't just argue about statistics, because it is very much futile. No, both from all sides. Because to say, well, I heard 99% of prostitutes choose to be prostitutes. Where was that statistic from? If we
Read
want
the book.
statistics, we really need to have a bit more credibility, I think, and be less selective in how we cite these things. But I really want this debate to turn more to kind of the core of privilege and power.
Let Tom come back on that.
Okay. My understanding is that experimental psychology indicates that women elect men to positions of dominance. And the research has been going since about 1967. You can read a book called Men and Women in Interaction, Reconsidering the Differences. And it makes clear that they've repeated this experiment, and it repeatedly shows that women elect men, choose men, and place them in that higher position. It's not really accurate to call it dominance or power. It would be more accurate to call it prominence and sticking your head above the pyramid to get shot at, etc. A man on the front line is not with a gun, has got much less power than a female undergraduate or postgraduate in an elite university who probably on chance had the course paid for by her parents. You know, it's a world of difference. It's a world of difference. So it's important. It's important. Well, you know, I'm not directing it at you. I actually am not directing it at you. But LSE is actually the most privileged university in terms of parents paying for their offspring to go to university, and so getting it onto gender studies for a moment, it is a bit rich when you hear these extremely privileged white females saying that, highlighting male privilege as some unsurmountable force. What male privilege are we talking about? Throw some male privileges at me. I'd like to hear them.
Should I come back to it?
I think at the back, yes.
Just in terms of you wanting to hear about some male privilege, how about we talk about the enormous underrepresentation of women in Parliament? Women make up 52% of the population. Surely, in any fair representative democracy, they would make up at least 50% of the Parliament.
You have the privilege to do that.
Second of all, I just want to, like, as you said, get to the core of the argument here, because we have been sort of, batting around statistics in a sort of not too helpful way. And I'm guilty of that as well, but it's very tempting. However, you say that most feminists aren't man-hating. And
Yes.
if you define an ideal, and I don't see how the perspective of feminism from feminists that isn't man-hating is somehow illegitimate in your eyes. I mean, you seem to have ceded your point before you even begin.
I don't understand.
Because you say that most feminists aren't man-hating. Then how are you presenting feminism as this kind of corrupting force that encourages women to hate men? I mean, it just seems just completely batshit insane.
Tom, it's the ideology.
This gentleman has had his hand up for a very long time.
Well, I'm actually going to admit that I'm actually a politician here, because I'm a councillor. And
Save us all.
yeah, thank you. Well, I brought along here. I'm not going to talk about statistics. We talked about domestic violence, for example. I've got a copy of the references for FEBERT, who has 177,000 studies done to show that women are just as violent as men when it comes to domestic violence. Yep. Okay, but as a politician, I'm going to say this. You talk about statistics. I'm not going to talk about statistics. I'm talking about people I meet. I meet the homeless, and I'll tell you this much. I haven't met the homeless. I go and speak to them. I go and sit with them. I actually hold them when they're crying their eyes out. I've seen, and most of those are men.
Yes.
They're on the streets, and they are men. Many of them are young men. They've got no future, no
Yes.
girlfriends, no hope, some of them. It is very, very distressing. That's nothing to do with statistics. That's reality. And that, women, right, you talk about women, you look at the Tiger Woods, right? I don't know how many women he had affairs with, probably 15, 20. But they all focused, all the press focused on how wicked Tiger Woods was. What about the women who engaged with him? They knew what they were doing, because he was a rich, famous man.
Blame men.
Yes, and this is what it's about. But I see the real people. And you talk about where feminism is going. I've seen the money in my council going to feminist causes, and the zilch going to the men. And the men are the ones who are suffering. They're the ones who are committing suicide. For every one man that kills a woman or hurts a woman, 20 of them will take a rope and hang it around their necks. Men are more prepared to do self-harm than harm a woman. It's against their instincts to do it. It's certainly against my instinct to hurt a woman. I can tell you that, and my kids as well. And that it's unnatural for a man to actually go and harm a woman. Those sort of people who harm women, there's something wrong with them. I will admit that. And I will not support them one iota. But it's distorted. It is distorted. And the reality is, men will go and drink themselves to death, leave the home and sit on the street and give up on life, whatever.
The lady at the back, and then this gentleman here.
Okay, just before I kind of get to the point of what I'm trying to say, I'd just like to rebut something that you said about women who aren't in top jobs. And you basically said that the access is there and that they can get there if they want to. And the question is then posed, well, why aren't there? You're basically saying if women can get into top jobs and they choose not to, you're saying that 52% of the top population just don't want to be politicians, just don't want to be lawyers, just don't want to do this.
That's right.
I just think that that's a pretty irrelevant point. But anyway, moving on. I think the main problem with the feminist debate is the word like feminism. It focuses a little bit too much around women. It should be more about gender equality, maybe. And so you should look at gender equality in the whole. And the problem is that a lot of, the people that have been disadvantaged in the past are women. And so therefore there are a lot of issues that focus around women, such as rape, such as domestic violence. Then there are also issues where men are also not necessarily prejudiced against, but men maybe suffer as well, but they should be addressed as well. But in this whole kind of gender equality debate, rather than just the two sides kind of trying to be against each other and battle it out, you should look at feminism as gender equality, not as just pro-women.
Feminism creates issues.
Yes, just to come back on the history point, men have been horribly oppressed in history as well. There is no historical justification for any wrongdoing today. Historically, men were felt compelled to kill themselves in duels, or to pay for every single morsel of food that enters a female's mouth.
I'm sure they are, but that is inherently sexist to the female and to the man. I'm not saying there aren't men's issues, but there's also female issues.
Yeah, so
disregarding or trivialising the way that you've done.
Yes.
Please don't interrupt that.
We think of the Victorian era, for instance, as a time when women were horribly oppressed. But there's another side to that. For instance, the legal principle of femme covert, which advised the legal experts that women could not be held accountable for a crime if it was committed in the presence of their husbands. So the history is not the historiography that professional feminists have taught you in the universities. I distinguish between feminism, which I consider myself a part of, and professional victim feminism, which realizes the conceit but then continues anyway. So I'd just like to remind you of that distinction. It is difficult though, and it's a semantic minefield. Call me feminist, call me men's rights activist. It's all about equality. Let's have it.
Still come back to that and then go back to the
feminism is a broad church. I'll leave it up to everyone else to decide how broad they think it is. But interestingly, I find a lot of sort of what's said around things that have around things where kind of men have suffered. That it's very much focused on gender when actually you seem to be actually focusing on class. You talk about the rights of working men. That's the rights of working class men who are constantly held back. We're talking about a different kind of elite. Let's not confuse things. And yes, it's the shocking realisation. Yes, I've got privilege because I'm a middle-class, university-educated woman. I recognise this, and I'm actually really glad about what you said. But I really don't want to get into an argument about statistics. It's the reason I did the humanities degree. I'm not going to be able to sort of justify the validity of things. But you mentioned feminism. Why is feminism important? Why are we having a discussion about feminism? Why do I call myself a feminist? Why are we not talking in terms of women's rights? Well, feminism is important because feminism links back to a long struggle for equality for women. And the important thing to remember here is, yes, we live in an inherently unequal society. This isn't about one particular block always having more than the other, but it's about actually a systematic oppression of the majority of society. And we could spend hours talking about where that comes from, but the reason we talk about feminism and we talk about women's rights is because, yes, we're trying to make things more equal, but by understanding that, we have to understand that one group is inherently more unequal than the other. So actually, I don't think there's anything different between saying gender equality and feminism, but I just think feminism is so important. Feminism isn't an ideology, it's a movement. That's why so many people here will undoubtedly give different definitions of why they're feminists. I think myself and Tom are actually probably the prime examples of this, whatever you get into that. But that's why feminism is important, that's why I think we need to talk about feminism.
Why is it important? Sorry, what's she saying?
I don't know. Why is the men's office in universities?
First, I would briefly like to thank Tom for being so great for standing up here and discussing this. This takes a lot of guts. You can see the hostility here. You're like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King. Great, thanks. But the real point I want to make is that I'm just utterly shocked by the amount of misery that I've seen here.
Yes.
Estelle, when you try to talk about his points on domestic violence, all you did was talk about, there are reasons why these women were violent. Yeah, there were reasons, but maybe there are also reasons why men are violent. Maybe you can try and see the issue from both sides, and not just with the default mode that women are always the morally superior nowadays.
Right.
And you could see similar preferences being mentioned by these two girls when they talk about rape. Yes, rape is terrible, but being falsely accused of rape, being put into prison for 20 years, being hanged, for a rape that maybe these people didn't commit is just as terrible, or maybe it's even more terrible. I would like to remind you in this context that lots of black slaves were lynched for allegedly raping some white women, okay? That's a terrible crime as well. And the fact that you don't even mention these things, that you find it okay to just dismiss forced rape claims, it doesn't matter, just shows how deeply sexist you're underlying, and that you live in a society that structurally prefers female experiences over male experiences.
Yes.
In other words, you live in a structurally misandrous society, and I would like to ask you to maybe think about this a little bit.
Yeah.
Whoa!
A few more points to the floor before we go back. Yeah, you had your sorry, back.
Okay, so I'm slightly disappointed by the proposition because what I haven't been convinced about is how feminism causes these violence and crimes against men. Like, I've heard a lot that men are abused, and there are a lot of issues that are pertinent to men's rights. But what I haven't actually heard is why feminism is the direct cause of these things. Like, to say, for example, if a woman reads a feminist book and then assaults her husband, I mean, that's the sort of like, to say that blames feminism, that's the sort of argument people make when, some nutter kills kills anyone because they read Catching the Rye or whatever. So that's basically what I'm asking here, like, why has feminism directly led to these things? And I feel like, the feminism side may have cited statistics supporting how there's a pay gap in women's rights, which is also, by the way, supported by the National Office of Statistics and the Chartered Management Institute. So I get, there's no statistical battle here, but I mean, it's really just, even if feminists just focus on women's issues, that doesn't implicitly imply that they also don't care about men's issues, or that they think, hitting men is okay, or that they think killing men is okay in any way. When a feminist decides to focus on women's issues, I don't think it's mutually exclusive with men's issues either. So I guess when we talk about these issues about how women are violent against men, and that there are false rape allegations, I don't see how feminism has caused that.
This gentleman's had his hand up for a while, but I'm concerned that this is a film.
That's why I wanted to come.
So, yeah, would you like to go?
Sure, thank you. Estelle, you referenced before that you don't know any discriminatory practices against men which are class related, but I'd just like to highlight that equality is one of those issues. All men who are fathers in this country have no right to their children. So I'd just like to bear that in mind. Secondly, you wholly explained before that violence by women is a response to violent men. But how do you explain the high rates of violence in lesbian relationships?
Yes, good point.
Would you like to come back to that?
I didn't say only discrimination problems faced by men about class. For me, that's all that had been referenced here. And paternity, I think, is one we could have a really separate debate on. Men do have rights over their children, and actually, the legal precedent is to attempt to split kind of rights between what it is, what's the individual. We can have, for them, I think there are pool examples both ways, but I think that's more of a problem.
Well,
where
the majority of mothers have.
Please stop. Actually, well, do you think that's not the case? I mean, there are various things around what happens, and I actually think this is again of a sort of gender where people believe that mothers should do more for childcare. So often in very acrimonious separations, men tend to move out of the marital or family home because they believe that it's better to be stable, and that's in a variety of things. And again, I believe that's just what people believe are natural gender roles, which I again project. So the second part, you said about violence. I said that's often a reason. I mean, I don't think I'm going to sort of sit down and go through every single case. I'm not aware of that statistic around violence in lesbian relationships.
Well, there's a charity called the Broken Rainbow, which specialises in
but there's
LGBT
also,
domestic violence.
but there's also, there's also a lot of violence in same-sex relationships, because often in same-sex relationships people are encouraged to take on gender roles. I'm sure many from the room have heard this idea of the sort of people go, well, who's the guy, who's the girl? Who say this to gay friends?
I think that's like repressive.
This is certainly not something I agree with, but this is certainly something that happens, and people are encouraged to take on those roles. And actually, sexism against women obviously seeps into women because we live in a society where we're conditioned to think negatively about ourselves. Because actually, when you've got a society that says one part of the population somehow less worthy, somehow should be objectified, etc., of course that will influence everyone, not just men, influence women as well.
Sorry,
Can I just remind everybody?
That didn't answer my question at all.
Can I just remind everybody not to interrupt people when they're making a point, because it's very rude and trying to put them off their agenda. Gentleman at the back, and then this lady here is on the hand.
Okay, as a man, I'd like to distance myself from some of the other speakers.
I hope you get paid, mate.
Take the red pill.
I'm sorry, even that in itself is quite offensive, I think. You talk about demonising of men in the feminist debate. I personally can only talk for myself, but I've never had any personal experience of being discriminated against on the fact that I'm a man. And I question whether any man in here has had that experience themselves. And I think everyone here will know that there's a long history of repression of women, and no one can deny that. I'm sorry, a woman could be raped by her husband until 1991. That was changed in law in 1991, and before that, if the man wanted to have sex with his wife, the wife couldn't say anything. And I think that in itself is obscene. The gentleman over there mentioned about paternity rights, and it's the man that has no rights. It's actually the primary caregiver has priority in the custody of the child. And yes, it is a fact that women are generally the primary caregivers, but that doesn't mean that it's the woman's right against the man's right. And that's my main point, I think, is that I think there are extremist feminists, I'm sure, and I think there are an extremist anti-feminists on the other side, and they distort this debate to make it about sex, when actually, like the lady over there said, it's about gender equality. And I think there's been a lot of sexist rhetoric belittling feminism and generalizing that all feminists are man-haters, when actually, through history, the only way that you can change any inequality is by having people pushing in the opposite direction. And as long as there is inequality, I think it's a legitimate position for people to push against it. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily man-haters.
I just wanted to respond to a few misconceptions or misrepresentations, whichever way you want to look at it. The fact that somebody says that rape is a serious issue does not mean that weak men should be put in prison for rapes they did not commit. I think that's an atrocious thing to happen. I think it shouldn't happen. That doesn't mean that rape is not an issue. The two are not mutually exclusive, and I think it's very unhelpful to present it that way. Similarly, with a lot of things that have been said, Tiger Woods was brought up. I don't speak for everyone, but as a feminist, I think that anyone of whatever gender doing whatever they want to do outside their marriage is equally should be criticised. I think the reason Tiger Woods was criticised was because he's the famous one. I think maybe we should use our common sense a little bit here. And I think also Tom mentioned a couple of things about women not being considered accountable for their crimes when their husband's present. I don't like that. I want to be considered accountable for my own actions, whether a man's there or not. I consider that sexism too. I think bringing these things out as if they make our arguments invalid is completely ridiculous. We agree with you. Also, I don't want a man to pay for all my food. I'm capable of doing that for myself, thank you.
Okay, going back to the guy up there who got a good round of applause. If I could read my own handwriting. Yes, wives were legally allowed to be raped up until 1991. I guess husbands were as well. I'd have to look into that one. But it's just... Well, there we have it. Okay, I'm going to continue. Women can rape a man. There is the legal principle recognised in law of involuntary erection, as with women. Just because a woman is lubricated doesn't mean you can rape her, does it? Does it? Okay, good. Primary caregiver is an interesting one, and I'm glad you brought it up. And that is a valid argument to say it's not sexist, but let's get pragmatic about it. The National Organization of Women in the US, the largest women's group, did have a policy of the principle of shared parenting after divorce, but then they changed it. They voted it down in 1982 to a principle of the primary caregiver getting sole custody. And so in effect, feminism stopped being about equality around about 1982 for that professional organization, because they said, well, it's not very popular with our members because our members want to maternal gatekeep, and so we're going to pander to that. And so I'm asking you to look honestly at the parenting laws as feminists and say men deserve a bit more of the privilege of looking after children and also the work involved as well. And just to touch briefly on the university degree that I'm suing, I was doing a master's in gender and they didn't mention the father's rights movement at all. And that's not okay.
So I'd like to come back on that, and then I will take this gentleman and this.
I'm massively keen to sort of get back to the floor, and I didn't want to come back. Just to say, you did the gender masters for 6 weeks.
Yes.
I think that's just, you cannot, I think, comment fairly on that masters, which actually is very much, looking at the programme, a masters on gender. It's not a women's studies course. It is a masters on gender that discusses gender, the impacts of gender, and to say, there was no mention of this when you only did it for 6 weeks, I think is actually firstly unfair.
I did it for 12 months, a master's, and it was exactly as Tom said.
I did say I would take you next.
Yes, thank you. I was interested that someone raised the issue of female underrepresentation in Parliament. As people may know, in 2008, Harriet Harman introduced legislation permitting parties to use all women prospective parliamentary candidate shortlists for the coming 5 general elections, or 25 years. There was no mention of this possibility in the 2005 Labour Party manifesto, although they did promise the British people a referendum on Europe. Now, both of the main parties have used all women shortlists for the last election, but the implication of all women shortlists is that the least competent female candidate in the country is automatically preferred over the most competent male candidate. And I wonder, do feminists consider that a price worth paying to get more women into Parliament?
Thank you. I would say I would take you next.
Firstly, what you said about in America, and I think too, the women's organisations voting for custody of a child to go to the primary caregiver, that's not ending equality, because the primary caregiver doesn't have to be a woman. That's just like a sexist stereotype. And also, going back a bit, what you said about trivialising rape, and that when you make allegations about false rape, you said that's not trivialising rape, but surely by claiming that so many rapes are false, that is in some way trivialising the issue by suggesting that women just
make erroneous claims against
They do.
men.
They do.
Not all, how can you say that
Half.
all claims?
No,
But that's
no.
trivialising. Anybody who
Trivialising
has
is
actually
fact.
been raped, anyone who was surely...
This is man-hating.
This is not man-hating. I'm just saying anyone who has surely been a victim of sexual assault will feel put off reporting it if, you know, people are saying that, oh, well, half of rapes are, you know, just made up by the supposed victims. So how are you meant to get up the confidence to go and report that and take action against your assault, the person who's assaulted you, when there is, you know, this atmosphere of people saying that so many sexual assault...
Just imprison all men.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, you know, it is in some way trivialising the issue for those who've actually experienced it.
Once again, can you please respect people's right to speak and allow them to finish their time? We've not got a huge amount of time left, so I'm going to take the cap down to 1 minute, so you can only speak for 1 minute, and that gentleman at the back his hand up for quite a while.
I was going to quick response to this guy. And saying the point, all women shortlists are better because they're made to counteract a more diffuse discrimination throughout society. And it doesn't matter if the worst woman is automatically preferred because you get the best one of that group. And that in turn leads to a more representational democracy across the whole of society. What I wanted to say was more bringing it back to the general theme of this debate, which was there seems to be a lot of the attacks on feminism is because there seems to be focus on the fact that there's all these male issues in which men are being victimised here, and I would say, yeah, those instances, a lot of things like that exist in addition to female discrimination. As has been said, feminism is for equality. What I think the Vaughan tack here is that there's a lot of victimhood going on. As Estelle has said, gender seems to be, there seems to be a lot of victimising of males. So I should have wrote this down.
30 seconds.
I'll come back. Okay, we'll come back to you. I haven't been from you.
Okay.
No, behind you, sorry. In the t-shirt.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I just feel that many of the men in the crowd have missed the point tonight in all this kind of rubbish discussion about bad starts. I mean, yes, there are still issues around violence and other crimes in men, and there are still huge issues with class in the society. But the things that tonight really expose many of the values which many men still hold in society, and which I feel that the feminist movement seeks to challenge and make men and women think about. The fact remains that many women and men feel there are still huge problems in society in the way women are portrayed, and with gender equality, and this ends up affecting women more negatively. I mean, that's probably why this kind of men's right movement is so small and fringe, and I think that most men would agree with me on that women are negatively affected by gender inequalities more. So I really just want to say, stop picking stats based on things you already believe. Stop dismissing the concerns of people who still, even in 2012, feel society has a real problem and a real kind of negative impact to them.
Read the evidence.
Please, you've had your hand up many times. Please go.
I just wanted to come back to this council diary that I spoke a while ago, but you were talking about homelessness, and I think just want to say that I think everyone thinks that homelessness is bad, and I don't think you can say that money isn't put into homelessness. Homelessness shouldn't be based on gender, obviously, and the money. I don't want you to interrupt me, please. And I just think you're blaming feminists for there being homeless people, which doesn't really make sense to me.
And I haven't heard from you. I'm trying to pick people that I haven't heard from, and a lot of people in the room. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to direct this if I can. Earlier on, Tom, you said that there is no sex slave industry in the UK. You stated that as if it was fact. I just want to know how you know that. Have you looked in everyone's basements? Because, Fritzl wasn't caught for about 25 years.
I'm going to take everybody that's got their hand up as the final. Okay, everybody that wants to make a point, put your hand up, and I'm going to pick 5 as the last few audience points. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, behind you, 5. Yeah. Stein.
Okay, I really honestly do believe we've got lots of salient points to make, Tom, and I agree with what some of the gentlemen have been saying, you down the front and the politician, but I think, unfortunately, the way you've conducted yourself in this debate has not really endeared you to your audience. You're obviously going to be potentially quite hostile to you in the first place. Please listen. I've been quite disgusted by both sides cutting each other off, but I do think that you haven't really represented your argument as well as it should be. I think, first off, maybe the face pulling and gesturing should probably go, particularly before court, perhaps. And secondly, I totally agree that both arguments have been guilty of twisting statistics, but the way they've done it, both parties, this debate has really descended into a man v woman. And, well, I believe it has, unfortunately, and I expected a much more refined debate, and I hope that there will be a more refined debate in court. I just like to point out, I watched your YouTube video and used a statistic about the number of rape convictions in India, and the ones that you believe to actually, the ones that were actually believed to be genuine, 2% of them.
Domestic violence.
Sorry, domestic violence. And whilst that may be a valid statistic, exactly, you don't cite it, and sorry, you're not looking at the wider range of who's making those judgments. Were they women jurors who are making those judgments? Were their judgments actually fair? You're not alluding to the patriarchy that Estelle has been. And I think we're missing this middle ground this debate deserved, and we didn't get tonight.
You're going to get a 5-minute station speech after we take the last 2 minutes of the take. So, is it you and 2? Yeah.
The really frustrating thing about this debate is that buried somewhere in the barrage of irrelevance that was the proposition speech is a really valid point about gender identities and us falsely ascribing social roles in terms of gender. And I think the gendered problems you identify as caused by feminism are symptoms of the patriarchy and symptoms of exactly the problems that feminism is trying to fight against, such as, for instance, the Fathers for Justice kind of thing. It always comes up, perennial favourite of people who sort of propagate this kind of myth of structural misandry. But actually, the reason that, I don't think women should be perceived as automatically the primary caregiver, but women are perceived as the automatic primary caregiver because of this, because of the patriarchal intellectual heritage that says that because you are female, you must be automatically more caring and be forced into a domestic role. The patriarchy restricts our imaginations as to what both sexes can do, and that's a point that I think has been missed by the proposition.
I'm not academic or anything like that, and I don't have statistics. I'm coming from an outsider's kind of point of view. It's quite interesting because I wouldn't really describe myself as a feminist or a male feminist or whatever you want to call it, or I don't know what the name is for it, but yeah, whatever. I mean, I don't think, looking around the audience here, it looks like we've got quite a mix of different people from different nationalities, parts of the world, and I can only see one other darker skinned person, and one issue, there's quite a few issues that come up. You've got race, so black people have been mentioned, slavery. Now I have history from Africa, maybe quite indirectly, but I didn't find it offensive, any comments or anything like that. But it's quite interesting that you mentioned black people, because imagine for a second that it was, instead of feminism and you've got the masculine, the male side, instead of that, maybe it was the blacks and the whites. Why have the blacks got these rights, and why have the whites got these rights? Because I have, on occasion, if you can just give me a few more seconds, on occasion I have genuinely been discriminated against for being black. Now, if you are female and you've genuinely been assaulted or spat at while walking down the street, that's genuine discrimination. There are some points that have been raised that are very serious, like rape, for example. These things affect a lot of the issues that we've got also have affected lesbian, gay, transgender people. And I think it's important to not forget that a lot of the issues that you're talking about affect everyone, no matter what their gender is. But it's, I think sometimes you're talking on the same issues, but getting your wires crossed, basically. You know what I mean? I don't think you're as against as each other as you think you are.
I thought it was 5. Did you have
Yeah, I will apologise to you, mate, but the reason I shouted out was because a load of people here, whenever the guys were speaking, like booing and this, and the standard debate was dropped, so I just joined in. But I was a bit disappointed with all the kind of mugging and all that kind of stuff. It's supposed to be a debate, you're supposed to listen to other people, so that's why I joined in on that. It's a bit of tit for tat. I think the important thing is that in terms of as a lot of the women here have been saying, oh yeah, well, we do understand that there are problems with men, we do understand male issues, feminism is not just about women. I've never heard that. If you can actually take that forward from this meeting today and include the 5% of men who are reading, or the 20% of men, whatever it is, in your studies and in your thoughts, that would be absolutely fantastic. I think there's two very important things I want to summarise on. I do disagree with this thing about sex slaves and that. You can become a sex slave if you're addicted to heroin, and that is wrong, and people need help for that. It's not just a question of coercion. There's all sorts of reasons for that. We all need to reach out to the people who are in prostitution, and the 100,000 men who apparently are raped in the American prisons, which is by Human Rights Watch. It's called No Escape. It's because we need to reach out to everybody. I think the final thing is that both sides, in terms of sort of this thing about rape and sexual assault, you get this kind of witch hunting mentality where you must be guilty. You get what the guy's saying, well, he's not guilty at all. And what we all need to do as students or long-term students of life is to look at due process, burden of evidence, fair play, and a fair hearing.
Yeah.
Hi, I'd like to take issue with something that this gentleman said earlier. As you pointed out, I'm also a black student, but I take issue with the fact that you likened Tom to Nelson Mandela wasn't Martin Luther King, which I just find really alarming due to the fact that I think Tom's thoughts a bit better than theirs, due to the fact that they're fighting for issues such as universal suffrage. And I think that shows a fundamental misunderstanding, sort of, about black issues, and also I think universal issues about civil rights. So I was wondering what you have to think about that.
Let's discuss this after.
Okay. Right. In that case, we're going to move to summation speeches. Both will have 5 minutes, and Tom is going first. So when I can all go.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to come back first on the female student who just spoke and ask, what men's rights movement literature have you read?
I've not really read feminist
Thank
or
you.
men's
Exactly.
literature, so I'm just coming here as a neutral student, really.
Okay, thank you very much. So you haven't read the literature, and I ask all students to look at men's rights literature. If you haven't read it, you probably aren't as well informed as those who have. The next, so I'm briefly going to whiz through this because Estelle did say, that men's issues exist. So that's great. I'm going to quickly mention a few. We're talking about maternity leave and pay. Fathers are entitled to 26 times less than mothers. Maternity support, 30% for non-custodial fathers, paying child support are not the father. One contraceptive for method for men, 10 for women. No compulsory paternity testing for every newborn, and no debate about it either. Parental alienation, usually mothers training the children to hate their father. Child custody, only 8% of divorced fathers live with their children. The glass cellar, 95% of workplace fatalities are of males. Male wage slavery, 60% of men work more than 60 hours a week in the UK. Gold digging, aka hypergamy. When will professional feminists renounce prostitution in all its forms? Men paying more taxes and getting less back. That won't be the headline tonight, though. Miss Andrew, 69% of factual media is negative on men. Women are 4 times more sexist in their attitudes. Not in what they say, I was mistaken about that. In their attitudes, women are 4 times more sexist than men. And sexism is portrayed as something that only men do. The lace curtain, men's issues kept out of the media. No forums. You, general students, have not read men's rights literature because there hasn't been any included in the curriculum, because it's being blocked. Chivalry, benevolent sexism, letting professional victim feminists get away with it. Suicide stats, 75% of suicides are of men. Homelessness we've covered. Disease, men die more of the top 14 of 15 causes. Feminist silence, life expectancy, brushed under the carpet all around the world. Domestic violence by women, 70% of domestic violence initiated by them. Conscription, only men between the age of 18 and 45 can be legally enslaved. Crime and punishment, being male the #1 factor in getting a longer sentence for the same crime. Men who murder, 20 times more likely to be executed for it than women who murder. Alimony, 26% of wives earn more than their husbands, but only 3% of wives, ex-wives, pay alimony to men. Retirement inequality all around the world. No mention of that from any feminist I can remember in living memory. The false rape epidemic covered. Feminist lies don't get discussed either, and that's what this is all about. That's why it's alien to so many of you. And many of you have probably never heard of the men's rights movement. That needs to change, and feminism needs to stop making up monster stories about men's rights activists. But the truth is, as I finish up, Estelle here says that, you know, men's issues do exist. Well, the most sexist attitude of all is to say that men's issues do not exist. And unfortunately, the organization that Estelle represents, although I will stress, she wasn't part of this, but this is from a previous year, 2010, says men's issues don't exist. It also says that men groups should not be formed, and it also says that we shouldn't have men's officers in student unions. So whilst Estelle is behaving herself today, the truth is that behind the scenes, professional victim feminists are hell-bent on blocking men's issues, denying they exist, mocking. And we're talking about life and death issues up there. We're talking about life and death issues for men. And, you know, I'm not a homeless person, but it's about sympathizing and empathizing with people who are not you. So, I mean, it's all very well to talk the talk, but professional victim feminists have got to start including men's issues. No more excuses, no more claiming they do when analysis shows they do not.
Yes. Expose the prejudice.
Thank you very much, Tom. We'll just move on to Estelle's summation speech now, whenever you're ready.
I see people in the room who know me sort of smirk when so that I behave myself with used. So I don't think that's ever been an accusation anyone's heard before. But just in terms of just kind of 3 things that have been mentioned there, I'm absolutely terrified of this constant talk of children as possessions. Like actually when we're talking men's rights, women's rights, let's not behave as if children from whatever relationship are somehow possessions of the parents, they're not, they're individual human beings. And just in terms, you mentioned taxes, about how you said men pay more and get less back. This isn't a feminist point, this is a socialist point. That's redistribution of wealth, and I think it's pretty good though. There's been a lot of discussion about the media and how the media presents men. So we look at how the media presents feminists. When was the last time, other than in what self-professed feminist sort of leaning newspapers, of which there are probably about 2, was there actually ever a positive representation of feminism? Like, the language of feminism has been absolutely co-opted by right-wing anti-feminists and is used to actually damage women. The language of empowerment has been taken away from women and actually used to oppress them further. But actually at the heart of this, I think, is, and some of the points that people made about this not, in some ways, not really being a real debate, there's actually so many people in who came with their minds made up, and it's great to hear you really say, actually, you know, you came here neutral and you wanted to know more. But it's this about how we understand issues. And actually, Tom, I think issues exist for men, but I don't believe they're men's issues. I don't think they exist for men simply because they are men as a group. I believe what we need to talk about are power structures. And in a society where one group of people holds the power, we have to speak in terms the fact that actually the reason I don't think we should have men's officers is the same reason I don't think we should have white students officers, and we shouldn't have heterosexual students officers, and we shouldn't have non-disabled students officers in our student unions. Because what that is misunderstanding the fact that in a society that's dominated by those people, every single person who isn't specifically discussing an issue from the press group is speaking on behalf of those people, because that is the dominant viewpoint. The dominant viewpoint is what we discuss all the time, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with having space to discuss the fact that people are oppressed. I don't understand, and it's an open challenge I leave to anyone in the room. Why does it offend you so much that I want to do something about the fact that society is structured in a way that
read the book.
Why does that offend you so much? I'm not going to read your book, so I don't want to give you any money, so give over and all.
You can have it for free if you read it.
You're fucking it up and giving her an argument, don't do it anymore.
Brilliantly on time. They're going to kick us out in about 2 minutes. So thank you very much everyone else for coming. And if you want to continue the discussion, I'm sure we're going to head to videos.
Anyone who would like to continue this debate as part of the documentary that will be filmed on either side of it is welcome to come along to an Indian restaurant where I've booked a table.
How many people?
10.
And also I've started up a society to discuss just these sort of issues at UCL, Feminism and Gender Society, and we'll have a slightly more intelligent reasoned debate later on.
If you want a main speaker, I'm your man.